Randy Johnson didn't cry often. In 22 years of professional baseball, he had faced the most dangerous hitters in the world. He had thrown 100-mile-per-hour fastballs into the chests of batters who didn't flinch. He had stood on the mound at Chase Field in front of 50,000 screaming fans and felt nothing but ice in his veins. He was the big unit. He was not a man who cried easily. But on that evening at Chase Field, something happened that he hadn't prepared for. Something that no amount of professional experience could have readied him for. A young man from Oshu, Japan, a man who plays a version of baseball that the world has never quite seen before, said no to a photograph. And then he did something else entirely. That something else is what broke Randy Johnson. Before we understand what happened after the game, we need to understand what Chase Field meant that night. It was not just another regular season stop on a long road trip. For the Dodgers, every game in May carries the weight of October in it. Every win is a calculation. Every appearance by Shohei Ohtani on the mound is a careful, deliberate decision that the coaching staff does not make lightly. But for Chase Field specifically, there was something else in the air. Chase Field is where Randy Johnson became a legend. It is where he threw some of the most unhittable pitches in the history of the sport. It is where he won a World Series in 2001, one of the most dramatic championships baseball has ever seen. The building itself carries his fingerprints on every wall. His number 51 hangs retired in the rafters. His presence in that stadium is not decorative. It is foundational. And on this particular evening, Randy Johnson was there. He was not there as a broadcaster. He was not there in any official capacity. He was there the way legends sometimes show up, quietly, almost privately, standing near the field with the kind of stillness that only men who have already proven everything tend to carry. Someone in the Dodgers organization noticed him. Word moved quickly through the clubhouse the way it always does when someone significant is nearby. And eventually, the word reached the people around Shohei Ohtani. The game itself had already been remarkable. Ohtani had taken his place in the batter's box in the first inning with the focused, unhurried energy that had become his trademark. There was no performance in it. No theatrics. Just a man who had prepared more thoroughly than anyone else in the building, stepping into a moment he had already lived 1,000 times in his mind. When the pitch came, he was ready for it. He was always ready for it. And then he took the mound. 5 clean innings. Precise. Controlled. The kind of pitching that doesn't always make the highlight reel because it doesn't need to. There were no dramatic strikeouts to pump his fist at. There was just one batter after another returning to the dugout without having done what they came to do. The Dodgers won. The score is not the story tonight. After the final out, as both teams began the slow process of winding down, that particular baseball twilight where the game is over but the evening isn't quite finished, someone approached the area near the Dodgers dugout. Randy Johnson. He moved without the impatience of a man who expected anything. He had been around baseball long enough to understand that players in the immediate aftermath of a game are somewhere between two worlds. Their bodies are still in the game. Their minds are beginning to leave it. It is not always the right moment for conversation. It is rarely the right moment for photographs. Still, word was passed. A message was relayed through the appropriate channels the way these things tend to work. Randy Johnson would like to take a photograph with Shohei Ohtani. The answer came back. No. The word surprised people nearby. Not because it was rude. It wasn't rude at all. It was delivered with the quiet courtesy that Ohtani carries into every interaction. But it was firm. And in that firmness, it was unexpected. Someone near the dugout later described the moment as briefly awkward. Not painfully so. Just the kind of silence that falls when something happens that no one had quite prepared a script for. Randy Johnson received the answer with grace. He nodded. He didn't press. He understood that no meant no, even when the no was soft. But Shohei Ohtani had not finished. What happened next took perhaps 3 minutes. Maybe 4. It is difficult to know exactly because no one was watching the clock. Everyone who was present was watching something else entirely. Ohtani disappeared briefly. Not for long. Long enough. When he returned, he was not holding a camera. He was not carrying a jersey or a baseball or any of the standard currency of post-game encounters between players and legends. He was carrying something that no one in that hallway had expected to see. He had written a letter. Not typed. Not dictated to an assistant. Handwritten. In careful, deliberate strokes that reflected the same intention he brought to every pitch, every at-bat, every preparation session that the public never sees. He handed it to Randy Johnson without ceremony. No speech. No explanation. Just the letter, extended with both hands, the way gifts are offered in Japan, with the full weight of respect built into the gesture itself. Randy Johnson looked down at the paper in his hands. He began to read. No one who was present that evening has shared the full contents of what Ohtani wrote. That feels right. Some things are not meant to be broadcast. Some exchanges between two people belong entirely to those two people, and the world is better for respecting that boundary. But fragments have emerged. Not from the letter itself, but from what Randy Johnson said afterward, when he was no longer able to hold the emotion of the moment at arm's length. Ohtani had been a child when he first became aware of Randy Johnson. Not a teenager. A child. Growing up in Oshu, Japan, in a household where baseball was not just a sport but a language that the family spoke fluently, he had encountered footage of the big unit the way young baseball players in Japan encountered the greatest American players of that era, through tapes, through highlight reels, through the particular reverence that Japanese baseball culture extends to those who have mastered the craft at its highest level. Randy Johnson had not been an idol to Ohtani in the casual sense of that word. He had been a teacher. A standard. A proof of what was possible when physical gifts were matched with obsessive dedication to the mechanics of pitching. Ohtani had studied him. Not admired from a distance. Studied. The way a serious student studies the work of a master. The letter said this. And it said more. It said that there were specific things, specific moments in specific games, that had shaped the way young Shohei Ohtani thought about pitching. That there were decisions Randy Johnson had made on the mound, adjustments visible only to someone watching with extreme attention, that had worked their way into Ohtani's own understanding of what it meant to pitch at the highest level. It said that the reason he had declined the photograph was not indifference. It was the opposite of indifference. Randy Johnson stood in that hallway and read the letter slowly. The people nearby gave him space without being asked. It was the kind of moment that announces itself. You don't need someone to tell you to step back. You can feel it. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He is 6 feet 10 inches tall. He spent 2 decades being one of the most physically imposing presences in professional sports. He is not a man who appears diminished easily. But standing there with that letter in his hands, he looked like something had moved through him that was larger than the physical dimensions of the moment. He said later, in the brief, careful words he chose when a reporter gently asked about the encounter, that he had been to many ballparks in his retirement. That he had met many players. That he had received many compliments, many acknowledgments, many gestures of respect from the generation of players who had grown up watching him. None of them had felt like this. Because none of them had come from a man who had done what Ohtani had done that evening. This is the part that requires a moment to sit with. Shohei Ohtani had just pitched 5 innings. He had batted in the leadoff position. He had carried the weight of a game plan built around his unique and still unprecedented combination of abilities. He was physically spent in the particular way that only a two-way player in the middle of a long season understands. And in the few minutes between the final out and the moment he handed Randy Johnson that letter, he had sat down and written by hand. Not a few sentences. A letter. Something with weight and structure and the kind of specific detail that cannot be faked and cannot be rushed. He had refused the photograph because a photograph felt insufficient. That was what the letter said, in its own words. That standing next to someone who had shaped the way you understood your own craft and reducing that moment to an image felt wrong. That he had wanted to offer something that meant more. That he hoped Randy Johnson would understand. Randy Johnson understood. The exchange did not become a press conference moment. Ohtani did not mention it when the reporters gathered. Randy Johnson did not make a formal statement. It lived, for a while, in the quiet currency of people who had been present, a few members of both teams' organizational staff, a handful of people in the right hallway at the right moment. But the story moved the way true stories always move. Carefully at first. Then with gathering momentum. Because the people who had witnessed it could not quite keep it to themselves. Not out of indiscretion. Out of the very human need to share something that had reminded them, briefly and unexpectedly, of why baseball matters beyond the scoreboard. A sport that can produce this. A player who thinks this way. A legend who can still be moved to tears in a hallway after a regular season game in May. Randy Johnson was asked, in those careful words he chose afterward, what he thought when he read the letter. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not uncertainty. The kind of quiet that is a man deciding how much of something true he wants to say out loud. Then he said this. I've been in baseball my whole life. I thought I knew what respect looked like. He showed me it can look like something I hadn't seen before. He paused there. That kid studied me. He didn't just watch me. He studied me. And then he went and did things on a baseball field that I couldn't do. And he still found a way to say thank you. His voice was steady. But only just. You don't forget something like that. You carry it. Shohei Ohtani did not speak publicly about the letter. He rarely speaks publicly about the things that matter most to him. That is not evasion. It is the particular privacy of a man who understands that the most meaningful things lose something when they are performed for an audience. But those who know him were not surprised. Because this is the part of Ohtani that the box scores do not capture. The home runs are measurable. The ERA is measurable. The number of pitches, the exit velocity, the spin rate, all of it measurable. All of it documented. What is not documented is the child in Oshu who watched Randy Johnson on a grainy tape and decided, quietly and completely, that this was what he wanted to become. What is not documented is the specific debt that a great player feels toward the people who showed him what greatness looked like before he had achieved any of his own. That debt cannot be repaid with a photograph. Ohtani knew that. So he found another way. Randy Johnson left Chase Field that evening carrying a piece of paper. He has not said where he keeps it. He doesn't need to.